So what's been your message as you've been going around town, right? What's been your overall message and looking back at those 3 years?
Well, I only got here last night.
Yeah.
So I was on the morning shows actually talking about Cyber Monday.
Excellent. Oh, right.
So why not, right? We did CBS Morning News Plus, which
great.
I always like morning shows because, people are fun and you can have a good time on them. So I broke out in song.
Oh, great. Yep, good.
Is anyone familiar with our Secure Our World campaign? Yep. So we got authorities and money from Congress to launch a PSA campaign for cyber hygiene. So we kicked this thing off about 1.5 years ago,
and
October.
I think everybody knows cyber hygiene. Can you just...
Oh, yes.
Now you make me feel like I'm a morning show host.
Yes.
That's great. Tell us about cyber hygiene,
like
Jen.
This. You play Gail Smith. It'll be great. So cyber hygiene, the basics of how to keep yourself safe and secure online. Yep. So we were talking about, how do you break it down and make it easy for people to understand? And it's just 4 basic steps, which are like the washing your hands and brushing your teeth of cybersecurity. And then we did a whole campaign around it. We did anyone remember Schoolhouse Rock? Oh, yeah. Yeah? So that's how everybody knows the preamble and how a bill becomes a law and conjunction, junction, what's your function, right? So we have this whole thing called Secure Our World. It's got a song. I recommend everybody go to CISA.gov and learn the song, but it's install your updates, make better passwords, think before you click and use multiple factors.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
So those 4 basic steps, I actually sang that, which made me very happy.
Acapella or accompaniment?
Total acapella.
Okay.
Total
We need the
acapella.
roots,
but we do have a whole music video that goes with it,
great.
Yeah.
So if you check on Twitter for either the CISA account or for Director Easterly's or on LinkedIn, and you look it up, and the name of the campaign again was?
Secure Our World.
But you've been at this since you were in New York class, since you were at Morgan Stanley.
I've been trying to do this. Remember, we were trying to do this.
Yep.
Yeah, this has been my passion project. I was an Aspen Institute fellow. I think we talked back then about trying to come up with a national campaign that was Cyber Schoolhouse Like Rock. And so it's cool to be the director of CISA, and then I could create my own campaign, actually.
That's one of the fun things about as you... I was going to say as you get older, but it's not necessarily about age, but as you start to get into the positions, and often, but not only in government, that the things you say, boy, wouldn't it be great, and don't we need, and can't we just... And then being in the position to do, having the power. Like sometimes power gets a bad rap.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, look, CISA. How many of you are familiar with CISA? I mean, I'll give you the little thumbnail sketch. Right, we're the newest agency in the federal government. We were stood up in November of 2018 to be America's cyber defense agency. So the mission is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every day for power, for water, for transportation, communication, healthcare, finance, essentially the systems and the networks and the data that power our daily lives. And of course, the vast majority of those systems are owned and operated by the private sector. So everything we do virtually is voluntary, and the success is predicated on our ability to work effectively by, with, and through partners. And so part of that is being able to be an accessible agency, communicating well, make sure people understand the type of capabilities and services and resources that we have. And part of that is being able to run something fun, like a PSA campaign, that gets people pumped and excited about it. I did very little of the work there. I was sort of the kibitzer about the ideas. And so they came to me at first. The team was, they're very excited about it all. And they had this mock-up ad that was kind of based, I think, on a FEMA ad where you have family together, like telling them to, do this, do that. For FEMA, it was, make sure your flashlights have batteries. For us, it was like, here, have your phone and blah.
We have a lot of those ads of now's the time, like,
absolutely.
Talk about your emergency response plan, then go back to not
absolutely,
not talking.
But it was very generic, right? The sort of, typical family. And I said, no, we want to do 2 treatments. The first one was Wes Anderson, wanted to do. Does anyone know Wes Anderson? Like a Wes Anderson-like treatment of Secure Our World. So we did that. It was kind of based on Asteroid City. And then the second was this whole series around Cyber Schoolhouse Rock. So you, as the guy who's like all about movies and all that, you should really appreciate this.
Yeah, because of course, it was fabulous. And she's saying it's not as active a program now, but we had the Hacker Film Festival, and we were doing things like, how many folks have seen the movie War Games? I mean, fabulous movie. It's one of the great ones. Oh my gosh, that was embarrassing. I mean, everybody knows CISA and they know PPD. They know PPD 41. So now we need to do our cultural education.
Do you know what my son's name is?
David.
Joshua.
Oh, excellent. Oh, good. Better than Whopper. Okay, so those are War Games in jokes. Watch the movie and that'll be funny.
You know what,
I'm glad you didn't hit me for saying Whopper.
My favorite hacker movie. Well, is that your favorite hacker movie?
Probably that or Sneakers.
It's a good one. I like Ferris Bueller's Day.
Yeah. He's hacking the system. Yep. So did you? We still occasionally, so CISA has great jobs. It can be found in USA Jobs. And before we got farther, and because we're talking about New York, is Mo here? Did I see, was Mo Talab in the room? Okay, he wasn't able to join. CISA Region 2 is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Oh, well
so
done.
if you want to join the U.S. government and do cybersecurity and infrastructure security, and so it's one of the frustrations I hear a lot from SIPA students, is that they really want to go to the government and to help, but they don't want to leave New York. Yeah. And so that's definitely one of the things.
No, that's one of the things that we have over the past 3+ years have put a lot of deliberate thought in terms of how do we build out our field force. I think we've hired hundreds of folks and put them in the field, whether that's cybersecurity, physical security, election security. And frankly, it's the key to the model. Look, the most important currency that we have at CISA is trust, right? We're a voluntary agency. We're not a regulator. We don't collect intel. We're not law enforcement. So everything is predicated on our ability to build and catalyze trusted partnerships. And, not everybody trusts the federal government, right? And so the real great thing is to have people who actually are from that area or live in that area who already have those relationships, whether it's state and local or whether it's industry, and they come with that built-in trust. And that's why we've put so much into building the program.
And especially like those jobs, because a lot of times you're at headquarters, you can feel separated from what's actually happening. And at the regions, you're able to help victims and help people protect themselves, which is nice.
100%.
So before you rejoined government, you were at Morgan Stanley running their Resilience Center. And so I'm curious, since that's another place where many of our students will go, they'll go to the consultancies or they'll go to the banks or they'll go to, do you see a difference in how New Yorkers or how banks viewed resilience versus how you have to now that you're in this role at CISA?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sort of one entity versus the country. It's probably the scale of it at the end of the day. I think the biggest difference is, banks, because they are so highly regulated, they understand innately the requirements and the things they need to undertake to reduce risk. And so I started out as the head of the Cybersecurity Fusion Center. It was a new center that we built specifically to understand, detect, and respond to cybersecurity threats and risks to the firm. And we did that for about 2 years. I think you visited, right?
Yep.
I knew Neil was certainly there with us at the time. And the leadership at Morgan Stanley really liked the model that we built. And so right around the end of 2019, they said, okay, we love the model, but what we want you to do is to build this in a way that can deal with all hazards, all threats.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
So that's where we became from the Cybersecurity Fusion Center to the Fusion Resilience Center, and I took over as head of resilience. And so it was pretty new line of business, frankly, and a lot of it was predicated on the new regulatory pressures that were coming on board to build towards resilience, noting all the disruptions that were happening. And so actually that was fantastic preparation to coming into a job like CISA, where you were dealing with the prospect of disruption or destruction from PRC actors, right, who we know are intent on going after our most sensitive critical infrastructure. Again, not just to steal data, they're certainly doing that, but also to burrow in so they can be prepared to launch disruptive or destructive attacks. And so the key is it's going to be incredibly hard to prevent all bad things from happening. So what you have to do is to architect your systems and train your people, and get your leadership in the mindset that there will be disruption. And what we need to do is to be able to respond as soon as possible and reduce your recovery time.
Yeah, it always struck me when it's that so many, especially in cybersecurity, less so for physical security, the technology moves and we end up having to buy some new cybersecurity tool or device that fixes this one thing, and then the technology moves on, and we end up with this huge conglomeration of tools. Whereas investments in agility and resilience, like exercising a lot and committing to an exercise program, that's a general purpose investment. It really doesn't depend whether you're hit by an earthquake or a Chinese threat actor group or a ransomware. You've got the processes in place and the muscle memory. So.
It's right. But you know what you say is interesting when you think about, like, you got to buy another cybersecurity tool. You got to. Like, we should just talk about that for a second, because I think that's the original sin. At the end of the day, we have a cybersecurity industry because technology was never created to be secure. And one of our big initiatives over the past couple of years is what we call secure by design. And it's predicated on the recognition that, frankly, since the dawn of the internet, none of these systems were created to be secure. The incentives were all about speed to market or competition for lower cost or cool features.
And
so
literal
cybersecurity
from
was
the
a
beginning of
bolt-on.
the internet. Actually, almost even before the beginning, right? When she says the beginning of the internet, that's absolutely not in any sense. Like, that's meant to be literally true. I'm sorry for talking about
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the famous, Dan Kaminsky, right, talked about the internet. A famous security pioneer passed a couple years ago, always said, the internet was not created to be secure. The internet was created to move pictures of cats. And it's very good at that. So again, and we've accepted this. In many ways, we've sort of unwittingly normalized it because tech is magic, tech is complicated. And so, we live in a world where we accept software entirely at our own risk, right? All of the acquisition contracts say that. We get devices that we constantly have to update because, they're built not for security, they're built for convenience. Look at this latest issue around the intrusions into our telecommunications systems. Telecommunications technology, network engineers will tell you those systems are not built for security, they're built for efficiency, right? And so this takes a cultural tectonic shift, quite frankly, and we've tried to motivate this through our Secure by Design campaign, and we're starting to get some pretty good traction. But I am not naive to think this is something that's going to happen in a couple years. I mean, go back to Ralph Nader, 1965, he wrote "Unsafe at Any Speed," and I call this sort of unsafe at any CPU speed. You think about how long it took from 1965 to 1983 when you finally had seatbelt legislation. So these are major things. It's like seatbelts and bike helmets and no smoking and drunk driving. All of these things that it took decades to actually sort out. And I think it's going to take that long. But part of it is getting vendors to design and develop and test and deploy software specifically focused on dramatically driving down the number of vulnerabilities and educating consumers and businesses and organizations on what they should be demanding of their vendors. They should be demanding secure products.
And two things come to mind there. So one, the first time we could find in print that saying that the internet needs to be that security can't be added by retrofit, I think it was October 1972. So we are 52 years and 2 months into that, and it's taken us this long for someone to make it a priority. And two, I'm going to start working on the lyrics. All I've got right now is unsafe at any CPU speed. And,
I'm with you. I'm going to have a lot of time after January.
We'll try it. We'll try it. Have some. But just to so I just want to go back to something as you were talking about Morgan Stanley there for a second, and then we'll open it up to questions. I've got plenty of others, but actually, first administrative. We didn't say beforehand. So we're filming. We're going to talk with your team about how to do that, but we didn't give the rules for the room, whether this is on the record, whether this is Chatham House for the moment. But
whatever. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, sounds good. Because when you were talking about Morgan Stanley and then talking about CISA, you mentioned three. You actually mentioned four different ways that you get change, and the ways that we've gotten security. Because first you said your leadership cared. Mm-hmm. Then you said also, but they were driven by new regulatory things. You then mentioned the threat. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned consumer choice in that we need to make demands. Yeah. And I think it was interesting because you blended all four of those in to your answer.
I didn't even know I did that. Well done. Right. I like that. Somebody writing that down. Yeah. There you go.
Right. And so it's very interesting. And I just wanted to, I wasn't sure if I had a question there other than how do you see that blend of those four?
I think it's useful to actually break it down, Jay, and in particular from a leadership perspective, because that's one of the things that we've been working on as part of like how do you actually catalyze sustainable cybersecurity. It's operational collaboration, and there's entities like our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative on that. It's the Secure by Design piece. It's the Cyber Civil Defense, Secure Our World, the cyber clinics. But it's also leadership caring about it, so corporate cyber responsibility. It's leaders at the board level, at the organizational level, saying we understand that cyber risk is an existential business risk and has to be managed as a matter of good governance. And you can delegate the management, but you can't delegate the ownership of that risk. And that was something that it was a real useful experience at Morgan Stanley to be able to work with the board and the CEO and the C-suite to make sure that they understood how we were seeing the threat environment and how we were seeing the imperative to keep the infrastructure secure. And I felt like they really appreciated the work we were doing and they resourced it well.
Yeah, great. And just a note for if you're interested in regulation, we just had 3 weeks ago, our cyber regulation conference. We had a panel on AI and regulating AI for cybersecurity, right? How do we make sure that the models are secure in the companies that are doing this? And Simha had been on that panel. Neil Pollard moderated our panel on finance, and Beth Cartier moderated the panel on healthcare cybersecurity. And so those links are up on CIPA Cyber and on LinkedIn and Twitter. So if you're interested, please do check those out. So if you're okay, let's open it up to any questions to start from the room. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Hi.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes.
If you're comfortable, because remember it is on camera.
Okay. Now I'm nervous. Hi, I'm Joey. I'm a first-year SIPA student here. My question, so it was interesting the analogy you made about cigarettes, seatbelts, how those were, like, these are safety standards that are now normal that before weren't. And you mentioned, like, Professor Healey, you mentioned the confluence of things required to like make change in norms of safety. But for something like seatbelts, cigarettes, those required like law enforcement to affect change, and like that led to changes, let's say, in like consumer preferences, etc. Like less people are smoking, more people wear seatbelts. With cyber, obviously, like you mentioned with CISA, it's very much reliant on voluntary and collaboration. But like, how do you like square that circle where like safety standards require enforcement and some surveillance, but also like if you want to build on that foundation of like voluntary and collaboration, how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's a really important question, right? So when I talked about these sort of cultural tectonic shift, a little bit of it is culture, a little bit it is sort of norms, a little bit of it is consumer education about what they should be asking for. But I think to Jay's point about regulations, I do think there is a place for that. Now, there has been a lot of work done in this administration on implementing minimum cybersecurity standards. Ann Neuberger, who's the deputy cyber advisor at the NSC, probably
and CIPA alumni,
probably talked about that. I think, and probably did Harry talk about kind of the harmonization piece. I think that
Harry Coker, the National Cyber Director, also available online.
Yes.
Please like and subscribe.
So coming from a highly regulated industry, I saw a world that had become so populated by a patchwork of regulations that in many cases it became compliance box checking as opposed to operational risk reduction. Which is why I think some of the movements afoot to figure out how to harmonize the various cybersecurity regulations. In my perfect world, you wouldn't have all these different entities regulating cyber. You would have one that provided common cybersecurity baseline regulations across each sector. And that's what they're talking about with the National Cyber Director. But what I think is even more important, and Jay, you might have worked on this in the National Cyber Strategy, is how do you get at the layer that underpins all of our critical infrastructure? And that's the technology layer, right? Everything is digitized now, thus vulnerable and also interdependent. And that's really through a software liability regime. Now, we're not going to be a regulator, and I don't want us to be a regulator because the magic of what we do is catalyze trusted partnerships. But from a because we're the technocratic agency, so we have been working on, well, what does a software liability regime look like? So it needs to be something that's rooted in an articulable standard of care, right? So what does that mean in terms of software development processes? And that also has safe harbor provisions for those entities that do responsibly innovate by using secure development processes. So that's what I think could actually make a huge difference ultimately. But remember what I said about unsafe at any speed, Ralph Nader, 1965, and then it took another 20 years. Now, we don't have time to wait for that, which is why we've had a lot of pretty good conversations with both sides of the aisle in Congress about what does that look like. I really do think that's the only way that we're going to get to a world where things are built specifically to dramatically drive down the number of exploitable flaws.
Yeah, I'll just point out just for because we've got a lot of policy students here. It surprised me in the White House National Cybersecurity Strategy, one, that they included this and that everybody seemed okay with it.
Yeah.
But what was really great is the original drafts of the National Cybersecurity Strategy that pushed this argued for software liability, which implied holding those responsible that aren't living up to a standard. At some point, that draft switched into being a safe harbor. So instead of saying, we're going to hammer you if you don't do the right things, it said, we're going to protect you if you do the right things. And to me, that was a fabulous from the point of a strategy, it was really saying the same thing. But in the way that you talk to stakeholders and potential allies, it was a great way of not alienating them. Mm-hmm. To say, if you do things right, we're going to be there with you and be a partner. Yeah. Rather than saying, we're going to punish you if you do things wrong.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same. It led to the same results.
No, it's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, our most important currency at CISA is trust. And so that's been the biggest lesson for me is how do you operate in an environment where there's low trust and turn that into high trust. Election security is a perfect example of that. But just to use an operationalization of your point, so what we did recently was we had this Secure by Design pledge. So voluntary, but once certain entities started signing up for it, so we launched this thing at the RSA conference, big security conference, and 68 technology vendors signed up to this pledge saying, we commit to voluntarily doing these 7 things to measurably reduce the risk of unsafe technology. Started out with 68, now we've got 251. Because one of our principles for Secure by Design is radical transparency. And so we put this out there from a communications perspective. And so other people, well, I better sign up to that because, this is now a signal in terms of this is a product that commits to security by design. So it's not all about regulation and legislation. I do think that's an important piece of it, but there's a lot that can be done using various other levers.
Yeah. And especially because we have a lot of public policy students here, we often only think about carrots and sticks, but there's also sermons, right? Of where can you're not direct, where can just by exhorting the right thing to happen and saying, here's a great direction, isn't it great if we go in this direction? that if you have the
Exactly,
trust, you
yeah.
can get 200 plus companies
If you have
that
the
follow
trust,
you in that
exactly
direction.
right.
Yep.
And that's the hard part.
Yep. I saw one here, and then back to Danny. Please introduce yourself if you're comfortable.
I'm Alex. I'm at the engineering school.
Cool.
I've been involved in the AI and AI for cybersecurity space for a bit, and curious because it hasn't been very long since CISA released the AI roadmap, and a lot of the AI development guidelines and that sort of thing. But I'm both wondering sort of how is that going from your perspective? What sort of movement have you seen since releasing those documents? And then also, I mean, the technology is moving really quickly. So I'm wondering what specific areas of the industry or what developments you're keeping your eye on the most.
Yeah. So thanks for asking. We have this great Chief AI Officer, Lisa Einstein. And when GPT, whatever it was, 3.5 came out November of 2022, and then GPT-4, I think the entire government was sort of racing, trying to, as quickly as possible, trying to organize efforts on what we needed to do as a federal government, and every single entity out there, every department, every agency. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to very specifically scope the mission, right? And so we scoped it at the nexus of cyber defense and critical infrastructure, and that is, as you mentioned, Alex, reflected in the AI roadmap and the work that we've been doing to extend Secure by Design into the AI world, which I was very excited about the fact that we had 23 partners sign on to that technical document, both federal as well as international partners, because while I don't think there's going to be AI regulation anytime soon in the US, there will be things that happen, and there already are within the EU. So I think, again, that's another signaling mechanism to companies that are creating these capabilities. In terms of how the implementation going, it's actually going very well. In particular, the task that we were given in the AI executive order to do a cyber defense pilot on how you can use LLMs to detect malicious activity. That was one thing we did. We're working closely with NIST on AI red teaming. And then we are very specifically focused on how critical infrastructure owners and operators can integrate AI capabilities in a way that does not introduce additional risk. The thing that I'm most excited about, and there's actually a proposal on this that we're working with DARPA on, is a program called Tractor. And I wish I remembered the acronym, but it has to do with translating C into Rust. Because if you look at 2/3 of software vulnerabilities are memory safety vulnerabilities. So because written in C and C++, so buffer overflow, use after free. And if you can eliminate whole classes of vulnerabilities by refactoring or translating C and C++ into Rust, into memory safe code, think about how you can make a big difference in making software more secure. So I'm excited about being able to use AI for that specifically, as I think that could make a big difference. So that's one of the things I'm super pumped about.
Tractor. Translating all C to Rust.
There you go.
Yeah. Although when I was putting in Tractor Rust, it was just giving me Tractor
Tractor
Supply
Rust,
Company.
sorry, yeah.
So it's I'm going to be getting all sorts of John Deere ads now. Thank you, Director.
You should be using DuckDuckGo.
I actually do.
Oh, there you go.
Danny.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate this. My question's a little bit different. I know when it came to the 2024 election, CISA put out a statement regarding, foreign information operations and be on the lookout. As the election grew closer, there were a series of information operations that the FBI then put statements to take down during that period of time, aligned with the Kremlin. I'm curious, as we have these cybersecurity conversations that are very different, but sometimes similar to information operation threats. How do you see industries intersecting / separating, responding to those threats, and how you see that world going on in the future? These are very different, but the same issues, whether that's through the government or private industries. So
you're a SIPA student. You mind giving some more context to your question about your...
Yeah, SIPA student, and I work full-time at Graphica.
Okay, cool. So Just to give some context, because not everybody probably is as deep into the election security piece as you are. So in 2017, in the aftermath of Russian attempts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, the Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, Jay Johnson, specifically designated election infrastructure as critical infrastructure. So it hadn't been before. And what that means is it says that election infrastructure is so vital to the national security or economic security or public health and safety of the nation that the federal government is going to lean in with resources and capabilities to help to reduce risk to that sector. And it's interesting because we were just talking about this in the car. When that designation happened, the secretaries of states of, 40 out of 50 secretaries of states are chief election officials. They made a statement essentially pushing back very strongly on any federal government role in elections, because states run elections and they continue to run elections. But the idea that the federal government would have any involvement was something that, frankly, states had a huge issue with because they saw it as encroachment. And it's an interesting case study, is what we were talking about, because it went from sort of a zero trust environment between Fed and state and local to what is now a pretty high trust environment where, just a couple months ago, I was doing a press conference with the Secretary of State of Nebraska, very conservative Republican, South Dakota, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa. And so you had 5 very conservative Republican secretaries of state standing side by side with CISA, talking about what we were doing to work together to reduce risk to election infrastructure. So that really is a sea change. Now, I think it's also important to understand, 2020 was very much about cybersecurity threats, because you're reacting to Russia doing some of the hack and leaks in 2016. But the threat environment really evolved over the past several years to not just cybersecurity threats, but things like ransomware, continued distributed denial of service attacks, very real physical threats, frankly, that stemmed from unfounded claims that the 2020 election didn't represent the will of the American people. And that was threats like harassment and swatting, violence against election officials of both parties and their families, threats to election offices. And so we had to really lean in on the physical security piece. And then to your point, threats from our foreign adversaries, who in this election cycle were more active than ever before, using more sophisticated tools. Again, AI was a factor, although not a game changer. It was an exacerbator. I think going into the future, that will be much more of a factor. But you saw much more activity, right? And that's what was reflected in, I think, at least 4 statements that came from CISA, FBI, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence about Iranian hack and leak. You saw a statement about a video done by Russia that showed people ripping up ballots in Bucks County. You saw a video that was created by Russia of migrants voting multiple times in Georgia. And so these were really evidence of what we had been saying, that foreign adversaries are absolutely going to try and interfere in and influence our efforts for 2 reasons. First, to undermine confidence in democracy and our institutions, and to stoke partisan discord. And so this was something, I did sort of a blitz in the media before the election, because given all of the polling, we thought, I think everybody thought it was going to be super, super close. And if it was super close, there could be this question about, well, we need to do recounts, we need to do audits in the battleground states to be able to know who won the race. And that's where we really thought that adversaries would try and wedge in and try to incite protests and violence, things that we saw in the 2020 election. Now, as it turned out, it wasn't that close. And so we didn't see that there was, besides and I don't know if we know whether it was actually Russia, there were there were bomb threats that came from .ru email addresses, but I think there's still an investigation about whether they were actually from Russia. But I think we're going to see more and more of this going forward. And so the meta question coming out of all of that is, what can we as a federal government do about it? And the truth of the matter is, there's not much we can do to push back on any of these types of things other than call them out when we know that they're foreign adversaries, or law enforcement take action if it is evidence of a specific crime, like the robocall in New Hampshire. From a CISA perspective, I wanted to ensure that we were not trying to fight back on all this disinformation that is, coming in explosive ways across every platform, but really just try and put out accurate, factual information. And people can choose to believe it or not. But there is a sector of people who do want to understand, like, how do you know that our election infrastructure is safe? Yeah. One of the things that I pointed out is that the systems that Americans use to vote are not connected to the internet. It makes it very hard to hack, not like absolutely impossible, but pretty hard, particularly given all of the layers. And the number of people came up to me and said, I didn't realize that, right? And so a lot of this is just helping people understand the facts, frankly, because, facts do exist. And it's really important for us to be educated on the facts, particularly when it comes to, those institutions that underpin our democracy. But I suspect that this is going to get even more complicated in years to come, and it's a lot of it, is because of the fracturing of the information environment.
Yep.
Hi. Hi.
I'm a research assistant for Professor Healey. I was thinking a lot about what you said about potential overregulation, especially like you said in the financial industry. Is there a way to create sort of like a balance where those regulations are mutually beneficial to private companies and the government, especially when it comes to not just the regulations themselves, but also the messaging for it, and particularly getting towards like small and medium-sized businesses and creating that trust in a way that it feels mutually beneficial? Yeah,
I think one example of a regulation that is trying to do that is CIRCIA. That's what the Congress put in place in 2022, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. And it's per se a regulation, but frankly, there's no fines, there's no teeth to it. The whole idea behind it is that if you have a significant cyber incident, and within the Notice of Public Rulemaking, it's defined what that is, then you report into CISA, and it's not for punishment, it's not for reputation, it's not for shaming or blaming or any of that. It's so particular if you're small and medium. If you're Morgan Stanley or whoever, you can pay a bunch of money to an IR provider. But if you're a small or a medium, you might incident responder, but you might actually need help from the government, right? But even more importantly, and I think this goes to the heart of your question, is the reason why you want to report into us is so that we can understand what's happening and warn other victims before they get popped, right? So it actually is a benefit to have people reporting, because it's like a neighborhood watch, right? You're going to want to know if your neighbor gets robbed, because you could be the victim the next day if you don't understand, did you leave your door open? Was your window open? What did they take? And so that's the important thing. You want to protect the victim so you're not, stabbing the wounded, but you do want to get that information out broadly in an anonymized way so that you can protect the wider sector in the ecosystem.
So we're getting close to time. Okay, I'll do one more, and then I'm going to take it back. Go ahead.
Hi.
Oh, okay. We'll take these two questions. Rachel first, and then at the.
Hi. Rachel Cummings. I'm faculty here at the engineering school. So I know that you have said that you're going to resign in January, but obviously cybersecurity problems are not going to stop based on who's in the White House. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts for those of us who may feel similarly to you and are less excited to be involved in a particular White House, what do you suggest we still do
to have an impact on these problems that are not going to go away?
Yeah, so thanks for asking.
Do you mind if I take both questions?
Oh,
I
sure,
I want to
sure.
close
Yeah,
out with
yeah.
a question that's important for both of us.
Hello, my name is Austin. I've experienced doing pen testing. I found vulnerabilities in the DoD, private institutions, etc. CS student now. So does CISA, when they go and help protect companies with vulnerabilities, is there like a conflict of interest with like NSA or CIA who are actually reporting the vulnerabilities?
Good question.
And how do you guys communicate that?
Yeah, so
Good question.
so I'll start with yours and then go to yours, Rachel. So thanks for your work. We work with cybersecurity researchers, and we have the government's vulnerability disclosure platform. So great to know that you're part of that process. Not really. So there's something called the vulnerabilities equities process, where the government key agencies come together to look at very specific vulnerabilities and whether those vulnerabilities for foreign intelligence purposes should be protected or not. Now, we're America's cyber defense agency, so we are always going to advocate for vulnerabilities to be provided so they can be patched and people can do something about them. I will say over my time, and I spent more than 10 years at NSA, so I've seen it from an offensive perspective. I used to work in TAO, which is sort of the center of gravity for the hacking community there. I will say, while those have been some robust discussions, I have not felt like there was any sort of like compromise in terms of what could impact U.S. critical infrastructure. And the terrain has changed a bit because, frankly, most infrastructure, global infrastructure, is underpinned by U.S. technology companies. Think things like Microsoft. And I think there's a recognition that, like, we need to lean more on disclosure and patching, just given the state of all of the global infrastructure we rely upon. So I think there is less and less, and I can only speak anecdotally because I've got folks on my team that deal with this directly, but I think there is less and less of this, let's hold on to that and use it, as opposed to let's disclose it and patch it. So,
and if you're interested in SIPA, we did a report, it's probably 2016, but it's all still pretty accurate about this vulnerabilities equities process and how it walked through. So,
and then to Rachel's question, thanks for asking. So CISA, so we've hired over about 2,200 people since I came on board, which is a lot when you're thinking about like world-class technical talent, which is cool. And part of it is, we still have a pretty flexible process. We still allow a good bit of remote work and telework. We hire a lot in the regions. And we've built CISA to not be like a sluggish federal bureaucracy, but to be something that's much more like my experience at Morgan Stanley at the Fusion Center as a private sector collaborative. So I am hopeful that not much will change because, frankly, I'm the only of the 3,400 people plus that we have now and another 7,000 contract. There's less than 10 politicals, right? All the rest are career civil servants. And so while there may be a new director, and look, leadership does matter at the end of the day, I think a lot of what we have put in place and institutionalized to include the collaboration we have both across the federal government and importantly with industry at the state and local level, I think that is now dug in. I certainly hope it is. The other thing I'd say is, look, the election security mission has gotten a little bit wound into partisan politics. That said, I think most people recognize, to include the Republican head of my Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green, my appropriations chairman, Mark Amodei, my former Dave Joyce, all conservative Republicans, have been huge champions for CISA. So I think they recognize that at the end of the day, like what has been built, the capability and capacity is very critical to deal with these threats. And I very much hope that like they're not going to do anything that degrades that capability and capacity that we've built up in a bipartisan way. I mean, separate from the silly headlines, it has been, we have grown now from 2 billion to 3 billion. So $1 billion, maybe even more than that. And we've grown in authorities, we've grown in capability, we've grown in talent. Like anybody who looks at that and then looks at what the Chinese are trying to do to our critical infrastructure and decides you need to slash this agency is like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So I would just say to anybody who wants to work at CISA, work with CISA, like continue to do so, because I think the foundation of that agency is solid and will continue to be a great thing for America.
Great. And I'll just push, because we had mentioned Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands, but also the other regions, because a lot of times SIPA students, they're ready to go to D.C., but they have family issues, right? They've got someone sick in the family, they've got kids, and they need to go back.
Yeah.
And so the regions are all across the United
They're
States.
everywhere.
So it's a great way to get in the federal government. So I wanted to close because this is the last week of classes and we're heading into finals.
Woo.
And so you've just been, you've talked about what you've been doing, the blitz in the media, the election, everything else, and you're still here singing on TV and going strong.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about what you do for your mental health during these stressful times and advice you have as we're going into finals, but also how you as a leader have looked to incorporate that. And we've got a pretty tight hard 2 o'clock because we need to turn this over to class.
Absolutely. So
Because I know you want to go a half an hour to talk about that.
Yes, I probably do. So the one thing that I did for myself recently is I got a puppy. And like I will tell you,
where is it? You came and you didn't bring the puppy.
I wish I could bring the puppy, but like that has been a transformation for my mental health. Is this little puppy? His name's Fitzroy Democracy Easterly. He's a 7-month-old Australian cocker dog, and my team knows because he's our CISA mascot. He comes into the office all the time. Everybody loves Fitz, so that's been very good. You come home and you get to like hug that little puppy and all the troubles go away. The other thing that I did was I took up electric guitar, which was something I could do in my office and something that I could do, which was like learning, took my mind off the intensity and the challenges. And I really liked learning a new skill, right? Because I think it keeps your mind agile and facile.
Wait, so we were on those Zooms. Were you practicing while we were on?
I was practicing, sorry, but I was paying attention.
Yeah.
And then, the last thing I say is we really put a lot of emphasis on mental health. I lost my little brother to suicide, and that was really a life-changing moment for me. And it's made me a huge champion for mental health and recognizing that, like, everybody's got issues. It might be your own issues or your family's issues or dealing with your parents and we all need to recognize like all of us need to care not just for our physical health, but mental health is health. And so we did a bunch of things at CISA, made Headspace available, the mindfulness app available for free. We brought in a lot of experts to talk about how to care for yourself in stressful situations, how to deal with burnout. Gave other tools. We created like a whole day called an Adanza. Right? You remember the Adanza? When I was in military ops for a long time. Yeah. But so Adanza came from my time in Hawaii. And it was like you had Friday off, so you had a long weekend. And I just thought it meant, you got to go screw off for a day. But Adanza, I thought it was a Hawaiian word. It stood for a day of no scheduled activities. So it wasn't Hawaiian, it was just Adanza. But we created that at CISA where nobody is, everybody just gets to focus on what you want to focus on. So they're just ways as a leader to signal how important it is for people to be taking care of themselves, taking care of their mental health, and taking care of each other. And I think, if people know that they're cared for and that you're going to really look at their whole person, then they feel like they can really focus better on their work and they like what they're doing. They feel like they're making an impact and that their leaders care. And that's how you create a great organization.
Yeah, and so even in the Schofield Barracks?
Yes, Schofield Barracks, 25th ID.
Yeah, so for 25th Infantry Division, for CISA, these are high pressure situations for real national and homeland security, and yet there's still room in that to take the time for yourself and your mental health and to care for the others around you.
If you don't, like you're not going to be good to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to burn out, and you're not going to be as good at your job, and you're not going to be a great teammate that you need to be. So everybody needs to focus on what they need to do to be the best at, and a lot of that is taking care of yourself.
Yep.
So
Great.
Cool.
So with that, please join me in thanking
thanks everybody.
Director
Great
Jen
to see
Easterly.
you.